Okay, welcome to the December 1st Task Force meeting for Street Funding Task Force. All are in attendance. Are we missing anyone today?
No, we got everybody.
Nope, looks like we got everyone. Okay. My comments are these to start off the meeting. I did reach out to both Carolyn Jackson and James Pierce, since they were at our meeting, our joint meeting with the city council, but they were asked not to comment since they were not yet sworn in, and they were not replacing two members on it, but technically they're the ones that are going to be voting on this because they get sworn in the first week in January. Anyway, in general, the comments from them are these. James Pierce, I'm going to quote him on this sentence. In general, I will almost always err first on the side of transparency. Option 1 with the split funding certainly covered that with the ability to show residents what the special assessment is funding. I am okay with a 16-year timeline, though in my work, I am used to a 10-year construction project cycle. So could you please look at other lengths of time for changing the policy? I was a bit not torn on the nonprofit organization participation. I do think they should participate. And I assume the only way to do that is through a special assessment, since they are tax exempt. Those are his basic comments. I sent a full copy though to Chad. Carolyn Jackson, that was on the phone, so I took down notes. For her, it would be option 2 if it was only money, but she supports the option 1 policy with the assessment. Her main view is that, especially with these bigger lots, and she lives on a bigger lot, by the way, she thinks that there should be an assessment because they use up a lot of the roads and the costs, and that so therefore she supports 50% assessment. Not just for big lots, for all lots. She would also be interested in what accelerating the timeline for transition might look like, and who it benefits and who it hurts. So those are their 2 comments. Are there any questions?
No, but I'm really glad you heard from them, because I was kind of wondering that the other day.
Yeah. Well, and they knew that they weren't supposed to speak, and I just kind of reiterated that because they're really important for our process, since they're ultimately 2/5 of the council.
Right.
And given what both of them seem to have said, will we be looking at shorter time horizons then? Is that part of something we should consider in our advisory meetings, do you think?
Well, I think for option 1 it is, not for option 2, because neither of them are interested in option 2. And 1 and 2 were the 2 that came out as the ones that the council wanted us to move forward with. Mm-hmm. So option 1, we can look at something that's different. Does anyone have a problem with that? Nope. Okay. Chad, do you have any comments?
No, we can easily run the numbers for 10 years. It's just tweaking the spreadsheets. That's pretty easy. They're all set up now. You can tweak it. And then the question we'll get to here at some point is we should review the other comments from the other council members and then discuss public engagement.
Yep.
Looks like Ralph had his hand up.
Yeah, so I think that if we're going to look at a shorter time horizon for number 1, and we're going to take this out to the public, then in order to keep it apples to apples and as easily comparable as possible, it should be a shorter horizon for number 2. That whatever we take forward should have the same time horizons.
That makes sense to me.
Okay, so my question though, since these 2 are not weren't part of the original conversation, do you want to modify this that we take out as to what we propose to council? Because there's part of me that's hesitant to do that.
I would agree with that because none of the other people brought up any issue with the 15 years. So maybe if we do the numbers on 10 years, we should not avoid the 15-year, really have two proposals out there, a 10-year time frame and a 15-year time frame, because only two people are suggesting a shorter time frame. I wouldn't abandon the 15 just because of that.
Chad? So support for 1 and 2 was kind of, I wouldn't call it balanced.
I can read them right here. Here are my notes.
Okay,
Mary,
go
and I'll just use first names for the council members. Mary was number 1. Kevin was number 1 with some number 2. Mike was number 1. Ron was number 1, and the mayor was number 1. Unless there's some way to make a soft landing with number 2. So it was really number 1 was supported by most of them. There was some partial support for number 2.
So my experience in getting feedback from our residents is the simplest that we can send out to them is usually the easiest to get the right feedback on. So I'm hesitant to send out 4 different proposals when really number 1 has that strength of support. So I'll take feedback on that concept from all of you now. Chad?
I would just add one thing that, yeah, I agree with you that if we send out 4 options, 2 different timeframes, I don't think the time frame from 16 to 10 is going to change those numbers that much, right? The first year is a big change in any of these proposals, and then it's a smaller hit years going forward. I don't know if give them too many options to look at because the numbers aren't that different between 10 years or 16 years.
Well, maybe the two people that Ann just spoke with, I forget their names, Pierce and Carol. Maybe we should let them know that what you just said, Ted, because maybe they were looking for a big difference, and if it's not going to be a big difference, let's share that with them at the outset rather than change our proposal.
Yeah, I think we can run those numbers and provide that information to them.
The other thing I wanted to say is that it is true that, as Chad said and Ann said, that yes, it is most council members kind of preferred one, but that's only because we proposed the 16-year. That was, our proposal. So I'm not sure if we had a proposal that also included 10 years, whether they would have opted for that. So I don't think the fact that council members chose among the ones the menu that we provided them with necessarily means that we should not consider the other of the shorter time horizon.
Here's my thought on it. That we go forward, that we put out proposal 1 and 2 as we wrote it. We get feedback. We do another kind of check-in with the council as to that feedback. And at that point is when I think we should, start developing, are there different years for transition? What do those look like? Because that's really what the council's going to get to then when we send this final thing in is we need to give them enough information that they say, okay, I like this one, but I want to change this part of it, or I like this one, but then they're going to need all the information. I would prefer to send out 1 and 2 as we propose them to our residents and just get their feedback.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I guess, isn't the question we're trying to get feedback on is whether or not we continue with any special assessments versus 100? So that's the question. It's, do we specially assess or is it tax?
Yep.
Okay.
Chip?
Yeah, I would agree that the simpler we can make the alternatives, the better. But Ken, when we talk about the alternatives, can you somehow say we proposing these on a 16-year time frame, but it could be shorter? That's kind of the outside and we may want to consider something shorter without necessarily showing the numbers.
Matt? Matt,
Ralph has a question.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just asking you if you had an opinion between how you want us to, when we send out for resident comment, if we do proposal 1 and 2 just as they are, and then Chip's recommendation, do we say something to the effect that the timelines could be different depending on what the council wants to do, or whatever, or people want to do, whatever, however you would say that? Do you have an opinion?
I think what we proposed is fine, personally. I think from my perspective, the objective of this is to figure out where people are at in terms of moving the assessment. I don't think they're really going to care about dates. The one thing I will say about what Chip just said, if you're throwing out the 15 and then you go to the 10, I'm not trying to say that you're selling someone a bill of goods, but you're selling someone that their taxes aren't going to go up that much, and then you approve 10 and all of a sudden it's going to look different on a tax bill. Does that make sense to you, Chip? So I guess that's the only word of caution I'll put out there is I think whatever we're showing people, know that shortening that window does make it, right?
Ralph?
So I guess the only thing I'll say is that, during the council meeting, the main disagreement to option 3 was the shorter time window. And so it doesn't, to a certain degree, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go to 10 if the overriding council said they didn't want to go with option 3.
Ralph, if I may, but that was because that was a 5-year option, and that was definitely way too short. I'm not sure if going from 15 to 10 is the same thing as going from 15 to 5. So it's not clear to me that the reaction would be the same, especially if Chad runs the numbers and sees that it won't be that different.
Well, from our council comments, though, the majority of the comments have been, if we go with number 1, will we stay with 16 or will we change that timeline? They weren't, if we go with number 2, would we do it differently than 16? So number 2 has had a minimal amount of support, and changing the timeline wasn't really part of that support. So I think what you're saying, Hamid, is not relevant to number 2.
Okay, well, why don't we make a compromise? And what if we do number 1 with the 2 options, 15 and 10, and number 2 as is? Would that be acceptable to people? So that people have full information.
I would just repeat what Don said. Really what we're asking people is, do they want to pay for tax or assessment on tax? And I think that's really, let's just keep it very simple. Put 2 ideas out there. I wouldn't even say maybe it could be less, because that'll kind of beg the question, well, how much less? And excuse me, I just told Chad that I may have to leave, and I'm just getting a call that I have to leave. But I would support just very simple, 2 ideas, put them out there. The way we heard the other day.
Chad?
We could do number 1, just give a range, right? Assess, the first year is going to be the same for getting subcut out.
Mm-hmm.
And years 2, we could say it could be a tax increase of, I was trying to bring up the spreadsheet now, but is it $5 to $10? And that would cover that range of 10 years to 60. You just give a range instead of a hard number.
That's a reasonable suggestion. I like that.
So Don, let's talk about trying to give a range, because then again, you're adding the confusion of, well, gee, I'd like it to be lower if I haven't had my streets done. I think we're starting to confuse the real issue, which for the council is going to be, if I've had my streets done within the last 15 years, am I going to be happy with this new plan for half and half or not?
Well,
I mean, that's what all the letters are always about when you change funding for street reconstruction.
I mean,
Yeah, the challenge that we face right now is that the numbers we're showing are going to be wrong. So if people hang their hat on in 2022, it's going to be $5. It's not correct. You know, this is a projection. So I just think, you know,
But you
I
got to show.
like simple personally, and it's just like, here's what was calculated, here's what was presented, and what was presented is part of the public record if anybody wants to see it.
Yep.
So,
We have to present some numbers, otherwise people can't answer your
Yeah.
question.
oh,
Oh, yeah, and we will. And I think that there has to be an asterisk that said this number is just a projection. It's not the actual final
Yep.
cost. Okay, so it looks like what we're doing is going ahead with 1 and 2 simply as they are. Let's talk about.
Dan, can I ask a question before we go?
Absolutely.
I don't have any particular motivation. This is just a question. Is status quo an option?
Status quo is always an option for the council. Trust me, we've had proposals come before, well, when I was on it and then after. And Don and Chad can speak to that. But, you know, they'll hear the facts. This is how you could change it, and they'll decide they don't want it. So, yes, status quo is always an option.
So is that identified on when we get public feedback? Is that option 1?
Ah, I like that question. I see Ralph nodding. Yes, that should be 1. How would we explain that option when we took 3 or 4 meetings to learn about street assessments, though? And as a group, even, you know, Chad.
Well, that's exactly it. I think this group said that's not an option. Something has to change, and made that pretty clear to council at the work session. So to have residents think that's, I mean, council can always say that's an option, right? When they make their decision, if they're not comfortable, but you want to tell the public, share that out, that there's status quo is even considered as a task force. That's not what the task force has recommended at any point here, is staying that status quo.
Well,
so I think status quo is certainly one of the 3 options. And if you look at the agenda, you know, point number 5, public involvement, data sharing, really gets to the core of what needs to happen. And, you know, I'll save my detailed comments for when we get there, but the rationale that was shared by the council as to what was driving their decision was significantly at odds with what the task force had found out time and time again. And so I think there's a huge education issue, both with respect for the public and yet for the council.
anybody else?
I guess I would not support putting 3 options out there. I think we've been pretty clear. We don't think that's the way forward. And I think the council put it together with that underlying thought as well.
Hamid, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I would agree with what Kathy said. And it is true that we didn't really talk about, as a non-option as an option. So in some sense, I agree with the comments that have been made. The other thing is that I think Matt brought up an interesting point. Often, when you present something, you ask people to, assess it, or provide their opinion one way or the other. The public looks at what you have given them. So it's important that at that level we are fair and we're transparent. And so you're quite correct, Anne. We don't want to confuse them. That's definitely goes in that way. But also, I do think that we should not confuse them by providing pure assessment as it is today, status quo, as as an option. So I would agree with the comments that I think Rolf and Kathy both made.
One other thought on that. I don't know what it's going to look like, what we put out there encouraging them to give us feedback. But if there's a comment box or something, people could always write in saying, I love it the way it is. Not asking them, just, there might be a place for them to do that.
Yep. Chad, you have your hand up.
Yeah, we kind of are getting in mixed agenda items here, but the public engagement piece. So tomorrow, me and Ann are meeting with Jennifer Bennerot, our communications director, and MJ is our engagement coordinator, to come up with a proposal that I want to bring back to this group on the 15th, our next meeting, and say, this is what we came up with for engagement on the topic. So today the questions were, what would be beneficial to the public? Of all the information that this group has seen, what should we share? And I think we just started hitting that topic. We got a few specific questions. I'd love to get that feedback from the group today before Ann and I meet with those two tomorrow. So that's one of the questions I hope to get answered.
Okay.
And then we would use the Better Together webpage. So you can go there today and check out what we've done recently for 58th Street project. We did an intensive engagement there. That was a little different. But speed limits was one where we asked people to give us their on changing speed limits in town. And there's different tools you can use on that webpage. You can have them put points on a map. You can have them, just like you said, just comment on the ideas. You can have them ask questions so that I can answer the questions right in the page so others that are there could see the answers to the questions. So there's different tools I'll bring back on the 15th when we get to that point.
Great.
So are we going to first go through feedback or opinions from the council session? Are we at that stage, or where do we sit on that?
Well, and that's where we were kind of hitting on that and the engagement at the same time. So I guess I would love to hear what the group thought about, what I heard was there's two options. And they all supported the subcut removal year one, and they told us to go out for feedback. So I don't know if there was any other.
Well, I had a couple of comments I wanted to get some clarification on. I think there seemed to be an opinion among many of the council members that option one, the 50-50, would result in a faster street construction program than otherwise. And I'm not sure I understand that logic or rationale. So maybe you could explain if that's actually the case, Chad, if you're going to be running, the street, if it's street program, if that's doing the option one would result in faster or better streets than option two. And then secondly, there was the sense of ownership of, the residents, that they've got some skin in the game or so forth. And I personally don't understand that really, but I'd like others' view on that. But Chad, maybe you can talk about getting the jobs done.
Yeah, in either case, we were setting the number at 4 million. So I don't know where the speed really, we're either way, we're going to be set to a number, and I'm going to have to adjust project limits to meet the number. And then we have this inflation factor going forward. So in either case, I think they're the same.
This is a misconception on the part of the council, right?
Potentially with assessments, the 50-50, there could be, I'd have to think about that a little bit more.
Chip, I think your point is right on. Those were two of the points that I wanted to bring up as part of this process, is that there were a number of comments by the council that were at odds with feedback during the council. And I mean, both Chad and Don chimed in that they didn't see an issue with the 100% assessment process funding projects going forward. And the other issue with respect to wear and tear on the city streets, it's my understanding from our work over the last several months is that it's seasonal variation in weather, not big trucks, and absolutely not homeowner vehicle. And both of those issues, I think, need to be feedback directly back to the council saying, look, these are things that were put forward that, quite frankly, the task force doesn't agree with, if in fact that's the case, and that So how in the process during the work session didn't allow for that feedback?
Matt, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so first of all, with respect to the trash collection thing, I'm on the Transportation Commission. That is something I think we're going to start looking into a little bit. And just in my former career where I used to do a lot of research about transportation policy, you are correct that passenger vehicles, it doesn't really matter if you drive a Hummer or a Prius, they do approximately the same amount of damage to a road. It's really when you get the big multi-axle stuff out there that does more damage. So having 5 different companies come through your neighborhood does beat up the roads. That's a true fact. So the only other thing that I had as an observation for the public comment period, Chad and Ann, I would like you to split out the concept of the subcut. While we all agree with that, I don't want people to get muddied in that. Also, particularly considering that 25% of the tax hit happens in year 1 of a 15-year cycle. I think it's important for people to understand and to take a little bit more time to talk about the subcut, or at least understand that separately, because it is in both of the proposals. Does that make sense to you?
Yep.
Yep.
I think the other thing.
Sorry, Ralph, go ahead.
I think the other thing I'd add, and you specifically called out James as his comments. I know there was at least one other council member who asked and seemed concerned about the nonprofits being taxed, and it was represented during the meeting that they were 2 to 3% of the overall group, when in fact it's really only 100 properties and half of 1%. And that pales in comparison to the people who aren't being taxed because they move in and out of the city.
Well, if I had read you all of James' comments, the reason that he talked about special assessments for tax exempt, because his church would vote on that as part of their operating budget when they had a special assessment. And he thought that was important for churches to understand what their costs were in operating. So his kind of comes from a different spot, I'll be honest, Ralph.
May I say? So, number of comments that have just been made suggest that there was not enough feedback from the advisory committee, from our committee, over to the council to clarify issues such as, prolonged project that didn't seem to be the case, or other things. So I think we do have to provide the council with somehow find a mechanism to provide them with that, maybe before we make our survey sent to the public. I'm not sure what that mechanism could be. So I'd like for Chad or Ann to comment on that.
Chad.
I think it's the report, right? Council gets the report. That's where we need to put everything in. So, I had asked the group comments and to help me write the report. I took a shot at what I'm hearing in these meetings. If you hear things from this work session, we could take that report. We're going to use that same report and just edit it going forward. So I would welcome task force members to do that in the future, to make sure we get the topics you think are important for the council to read.
You'll find also, though, that from these resident feedback, the trucks on the road are going to come up. The garbage trucks on the road are going to come up. Those are all going to be things that you're going to see. There'll be things that are off topic that will come up. Just understand that this is a great vehicle to then be able to answer all those things. And in our certainly in our final report, and if we do another check-in before our final report, that we will be flushing out all these parts. So yes, we only had an hour with the council and we were on a tight line. But you got the general gist. You heard some other questions, and let's let the residents chime in so that we can use those then to help flush out the answers that we're going to send forward to the council. Chad, since I printed the agenda, but maybe I'm missing something. Where else do you want us to head next?
I guess so we're going to try to keep it as simple as possible. All the learning, we've spent 4 meetings really diving into heavy details. So maybe you let me and MJ and Jennifer and take a shot at a proposal for public engagement. We're going to meet tomorrow, and we'll bring that back on the 15th. The next piece, I guess I was going to talk a schedule, right? So we'll bring that on the 15th. We can set up the website for he's tweaking that proposal when we hear from this group, set it up that week or the week after. And then I was thinking we'd take a break for meetings over the holidays, Christmas, New Year's, and then set a time frame for the community feedback, probably let a first week or two of January, giving those people opportunities if they're in and out of town, busy. And then we would reconvene and I'd summarize all the feedback. And then we would set a schedule of going forward and maybe starting to talk about some of those other items that we kind of left on the table, was retaining walls, street lighting, and then what's it mean for the MSA streets policy. And then take those meetings into the 21 and see if it's a work session again, or right to a council meeting to make a recommendation. We've done that.
Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I had a question.
Timeline?
I need to leave. I'll see you later or next time.
So I had a question. So, and you're going to be meeting to formulate the questions for sending to the public tomorrow. Is that, understand that to be the case? Is there any way in which once you set up the questions for us to provide, maybe since we can't meet again, just like email, electronic feedback?
We're going to meet on the 15th. We are
Okay,
not
so
sending,
you won't be
we are
sending.
not sending out a
Oh,
survey
gotcha.
without
Okay.
you guys having the ability to talk about how you feel about the
Okay.
questions and everything.
Okay.
Absolutely not. So,
Okay, sounds good.
Don.
Yeah, I just want to comment about the schedule a little bit.
Yeah.
So because we do a 2-year budget process, so next year is a big budget year for us. We typically start that process in earnest with a council retreat. Probably, I expect it to be at the beginning of the year. So a decision from this group to give to the city council, it would really be helpful to have that by March as we start kind of looking at everything else we need to do in terms of the tax impact for 2022. So the sooner the better.
I totally agree that we should shoot for early March with a recommendation to council.
So should we meet January 12th? Do you think, Chad, that's going to give us enough time for feedback?
Yep.
Okay, so our next meeting would be the 12th and then the 26th of January after the December 15th meeting. Comment?
I may not be able to attend 15th meeting. I may be out of town,
We will send you the information ahead of time and you can always reply.
thank you.
Okay, so you have the schedule, Chad. Are you good with that?
Yep.
And understand, people will tell you that you shouldn't ask over Christmas. You shouldn't ask in August because I always take a family trip. You shouldn't ask in May because my kids are in after school final activities. Just understand you're going to get some response that our timing is really bad. Timing is always bad. So just ignore those. So retaining walls, are we putting retaining walls, street lighting, row on are you thinking that we're going to add that to this questionnaire?
I would not.
I wouldn't either. Okay.
Keep it. And if we collect, we talked about the collections and those items are just going to be part of the project, I think.
Okay.
And we figure out how to integrate those into whatever scenario or option we get to.
So Ann and Chad, when you meet tomorrow, are you going to be working on the format and the information to be part of this, to provide to the public for the comments, or are you more thinking about the mechanism you're going to be using for the public comment, the content or the mechanism, or both? I guess is the question.
Both.
Yep, I think it'll be both. How do we give a simple 1-2 paragraph kickoff, right? Because when you get to the web page, you got to have something why are we doing this? What are we after? We need your feedback. And then we could they always talk about the widgets. What widgets are we going to use for people to provide feedback and questions and comments? You know, I don't think it's a survey, and I don't think we're voting on it. So it's just we're going to collect a bunch of feedback and then analyze that feedback and see what the general themes are of that.
Yeah. I think our goal, Chip, is also to be able to use Jennifer and her team's experience in reaching out with these kinds of things on Better Together that has produced some good information on what has produced confusion. So we need to find out from her, you know, exactly what's worked. It's her expertise we're really depending on because we want this to work. We want to get the really good feedback. Ahmed.
I understand that, I heard two kinds of opinions about subcut. So on the one hand, I heard that it may make it more complex for the people to understand and to provide feedback. On the other hand, our discussions over the past several months has suggested that subcut seems to be an important component. So I was wondering where you guys are at in terms of thinking about the content, given what Chip said in terms of the content. Whether are you thinking about providing in your questionnaire something about the subcut? Are you thinking about removing that at this point, at this stage, because it's too confusing? I didn't quite understand what your thinking is about that.
I'll tell you what my thinking is about, and then Chad can chime in. I like the idea of splitting out the subcut, but I think it needs to be a statement in its own right. As we do this Better Together, I think we have to talk about what Ralph has always talked about, the equity of having the street at everybody's house always the same for construction, and however that gets worded, that it's clearer than how I word it, since English is not my strongest suit. My mother said stubbornness is, but yes, so that both proposals, we just say, here, the proposal is that year one, we're going to pay for this. This is why we feel that this is important. However, we state that, and I've always liked how Ralph has stated it. Then it will be, proposal one after that and two, so that it's just kind of clear that this task force feels strongly that this is something that the city should pay for. Obviously, if you're doing number two, you would pay for it anyway, but let's just keep it, as we did with both proposals, really clear. And
Right.
then we'll go through year 2 through 16, I guess. Right, Chad?
Yep, and I'd come up with a better graphic than the one I've been using with the group, much easier to understand what is actually subcut. Come up with a better graphic.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
And Ann and Chad, I mean, my thinking there is that you can relate that to other changes we've done in the past, like going to REUs in the first place to help with the corner issue, right? Like these are things that we've done to try to make it so that it's fair and that we're paying for the same thing regardless of where you live or what location on a block you happen to be. Does that make sense? So that's to me like just teeing that up. But knowing that, I mean, even in your neighborhood, Hamid, where there's the $30,000 assessment, like year one, you're shaving $7,500 off of that. That's being paid by somebody else if it's 25%. So I'm just throwing it out there. So year one, 25% of it goes away.
Ralph?
Well, and I think this is an important point, is that, Matt, I wouldn't necessarily say that 25% of it goes away. It goes away if subcut represents 25% of your project cost.
Right.
So if you don't have any subcut for your project cost, I mean, it's still going to pay the $30,000.
That's right.
So I think that's
an important observation. Correct.
Yep.
I think that's a distinction that needs to be made as we lay it out.
Yeah, we will.
There's going to be heterogeneity in the subcut question. It's not, they shouldn't expect to all have a quarter of,
No, I don't think that's
project.
what Matt was saying. He was trying to give your neighborhood as an example, Ahmed. So
Right. No, I understand.
let's relax on that one a little, guys. Okay, Chad. I was a little interested in the council's reaction to the row items of irrigation and underground fences and everything. we all kind of felt, wow, here's this part that you shouldn't be putting anything in, and now you make everybody else pay for it. Their reaction wasn't what I expected.
And I think that goes to my last item I wanted to make sure. So we had two members, I think, wanted for more study, right? I just threw out a subcut number. I need someone to go back through the historical records of our street recon and do that analysis, look at the actual inflation, look at what is pet fence and irrigation. What is the percentage? I think it's less than 1%. So is it really worth having staff start permitting these things and fighting when it could be a little give to the residents just to repair those things? So that's the next step for me. I've already left a message with a consultant to help analyze some of that. So that's something I bring back early January too. Here's our analysis and what should be subcut number that we go forward with.
So my final question is, are we putting street lighting in anybody's opinion other than maybe Chad's and mine and Don's, and I'd rather hear from you guys first. Are we even asking about street lighting on this particular? Because only people that have had their neighborhoods done understand that all of a sudden they're asked to pay for street lighting. Do we want any information about how people feel about having street posts, not covert? Yes, David.
I guess just for me, I don't know enough about it yet as far as like how much it costs and what attitudes are about it and how we would go about saying whether it's here and not there or there and not here. I guess I'm not ready to make any judgments about it from my perspective anyway.
So ultimately, is our report going to push it off and say, we think you should do a study on street lighting?
Hey, Ann?
Yeah.
This is Matt. I mean, my opinion remains the same, is that roads are a community good. Street lighting, I think, is a local decision. If I don't drive on your street, I'm not taking any benefit of the street lighting. And, in my neighborhood, personally, I don't want street lights, so I don't know why I should be paying for street lights on somebody else's house. If that makes sense to you. I think that the local community should figure that out.
That has, and I think that was part of when Ralph and I were talking about having a plan that allows each neighborhood then to choose for themselves whether they wanted to just, you have to have Cobra lights at intersections because it's a safety issue. Posts along the street are a whole different deal. So I think when we talked, some of us as a group, it was always with that idea that neighborhoods would choose yes or no. It was just, we were thinking that there should be a package, and then the question was, how does it get paid for? Chad?
Well, I think it should be a separate topic. It's such a difficult one in its own right. We survey residents every year with our recons, and it's 50-50. Half people want them, half don't, even if they pay for them or not. So is that a aesthetic community benefit that we should study it with a different group to say, yes, we're going to do these lights on, maybe it's the state aid streets, because that's where we're really building out all the sidewalks. And there's another funding source. So I wouldn't ask a question now, but it may come back in our discussions when we look at the MSA policy after we start to look at a recommendation on the local side. So,
okay, anyone else have any other feedback to this?
Yeah, I was just going to sort of echo what Chad said. I think it would be just to keep things simple. I think I would probably not bring it up at this stage, but it's certainly something worth looking into further down the road. Thanks.
Okay. Chad, you need any other discussion before we have this meeting tomorrow?
I think I'm pretty clear with the group.
Does anyone feel we've missed something that they want to talk about now? Are we good?
And I don't think we even touched, I thought the work session went great. That is, to get direct feedback is a good thing. Sometimes it's a little vague, and sometimes the comments, I thought we got some really good feedback from the council. No matter what we decide, it's going to be a difficult decision for them for all the reasons we've talked about as this task force. But I think it was a good first work session to check in. They appreciated it and look forward to see what the next steps will be in early 21.
And
I
I'll
think we're
pass-
all good until we get the hate mail and the
Yeah.
Sun Current and maybe a few letters to our houses, and then we'll have a different conversation.
we
Well, and I want to bring
might,
up
that's
one other
true.
thing too, is we have a special council meeting scheduled for Monday night, December 7th. We're going forward with 5 miles of street reconstruction projects with the 100% assessment policy. So I know for sure I'm going to get questions. Where's the task force? We heard this task force is coming up with ideas. So we're generally going to speak to what we presented to council at the work session, but your ears might be ringing when you on the Monday night, because I'm sure this group's name's going to come up at that public hearing on the 7th.
I do want you to know both Carolyn Jackson and James Pierce were really impressed with the work you guys had all and women had all done. And they both commented on that. So nice job.
Great. Anything
Okay.
else, Ann?
So we'll see you all on the 15th, except maybe Ahmed, but you'll give your response to Chad's email that he sends
Yes.
out with the concept
Yes.
ideas before then.
Definitely, yes.
Yep.
Okay. Hey,
Okay.
10 minutes early. This is a first, guys.
Carry it over.
Everybody.
Okay, I will carry it over. I like that. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Meeting adjourned.